What is the creepiest thing that's happened to you personally that made you question reality? I'm curious if anyone else has had this happen. Years ago, my then wife and I would run into the same woman everywhere we went. And I mean everywhere we went. This went on for about a year. Go to the grocery store? She would be there shopping. Starbucks? Yep, sitting right behind us. Walking around the mall? She would pass us walking in the other direction. Movie theater? She'd be behind us in line getting popcorn. The creepiest encounter was while driving on the freeway. My wife looked at the car next to us and screamed. Yep, it was her. She was always alone, never talked to us, and always made eye contact. She had a very unique appearance. She was very tall, very thin, and had very tight skin on her face. It was so unusual that we joked that we were being studied by an alien. It was some serious glitch in the Matrix stuff. It was years ago, when I was about 17. I had gotten home from school and wasn't feeling well, so I spent the rest of the day just laying on the couch. By about 8 p.m. I was feeling even worse and decided I should just try to sleep whatever it is off, so I go to my room and get in bed and pass out pretty quickly. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I suddenly woke up in my pitch black bedroom and all I could think was, I'm going to die right now. My body was so weak, the room was spinning and my body felt like it was on fire. I look over to the edge of my bed and sitting on the edge is my grandmother, who died just a few months ago. She pats my arm and says it's going to be okay. Just call for your dad. Try it. Call for your dad. So I start calling for him and it felt like an eternity, but he finally burst through my door and asks what's wrong. I look over and my grandmother is gone. After that, he gets me up and takes me to the ER where I have a fever of 106F, which explains a lot. I had to get a ton of fluids and a shot in my hip, but I eventually felt okay-ish. Her being there felt so real. It was so weird. I know logically she wasn't, but it felt so real. That sort of messed with me a little. I loved her dearly and her death was very sudden. We kept her ashes in a nice urn in the house under a painting she had done herself. When I got home and passed by, I said thanks to her. I know it was the fever melting my brain and maybe some sleep paralysis, but it still made me question the afterlife and those sorts of things. I've told this before, but about 7 years ago I was at my mom's house, I live next door, and this white car pulls into the driveway. We weren't expecting anyone, so I assumed they were lost and needed directions, and went to the door. A white woman in her 50s or 60s got out, along with a 9 or 10-year-old black girl. Surprised me because I expected the kid to stay in the car if they just needed directions. I open the door and the woman kind of nudges the girl towards me, both with big smiles on their faces. I said, "Hi, what can I help you with?" She asked if I was Baggy Raccoon and I said yes. She told me they went to a neighbor's house looking for me, and they pointed her to our house. They just kind of stared at me expectantly, like I was supposed to know the girl and be happy to see her. When I didn't react, the woman told me they were here to see the dentist. No dentists here. Small ranch-style house in a fairly rural neighborhood. No dentists here. Not anywhere near us. The woman and the girl just kept smiling. They didn't look confused. They just kept saying, "Are you sure?" Finally they left, and later I asked the neighbor who directed them to our house, and she said she never told the woman my name, that the woman asked for me specifically. It's always kind of haunted me. I really feel like I was supposed to know that girl. Like, if I was a guy, this would be someone trying to introduce me to a kid I didn't know I had. I honestly started wondering if I was nuts and had given up a child for adoption. It was that strange of a feeling. My mom firmly believes the girl will come back someday to tell me what it was about, and I think about it frequently. Drives me insane to wonder what they really wanted. When I was 12 or so and still living at my parents' house, I woke up in the middle of the night to pee. I got to the bathroom and heard what sounded like a party going on downstairs. Laughter, music, the sound of glasses being knocked together for a toast, the whole shebang. I thought it was weird that my parents had friends over so late and hadn't told me, but I decided to go and see who was there. Opened the door to the kitchen and the entire downstairs was completely dark and silent, not even a TV on. I was thoroughly confused, but the strangeness of the situation didn't really register, so I never told anyone. Years and years later I mentioned this to my dad and he said he had heard them too. Turns out there used to be a small public bar in their home, which is over 150 years old. I guess some of the patrons decided to hang out for eternity. My cat hated me for the first 7 years we had him. He was a feral that was tamed by my wife, and only accepted affection from her. My wife assured me that this was common for ferals. Then one day he suddenly warmed up to me, and wanted me to pet him. We've been best friends ever since. This was approximately 4 years ago, about the time that my wife's brain cancer was becoming aggressive. Even before we were aware of it. She died 2 years ago. It's like he knew it was just going to be the two of us one day. I burnt about 10 filing cabinets full of papers for my high school friend's dad for less than minimum wage back in 2004. Literally millions of lines of words, maybe even a million pages or close, just tossing them into a barrel burning. After a few hours, I victoriously tossed in the last folder. A little sprite of flame shoots out and a singed fortune cookie looking piece of paper floats to the ground in front of me with the words only. What burns does not return. I still don't know WTF. The probability just is astronomical. Not me, but my grandfather. My grandfather had been in WW2 and told us about when himself and a few other soldiers had been separated from his unit and were trying to get to Normandy. They had gone through a clearing in a wooded area but had to drop when they heard something approaching. They were on their bellies in low grass when they saw 20 or 30 German soldiers running across the clearing, clearly in a state of panic. Then they just froze in mid-step. He said they resembled statues and that some weren't even touching the ground, and that there was no noise whatsoever, even the birds had gone silent. After a few seconds came a loud noise like metal scraping on concrete, and the frozen soldiers started to become blurry to the point at which they vanished without a trace. This had been reported by all of the soldiers that were present, and all were called to the War Office London after their return to the UK, where they were pressed on what they saw over the period of a few days, and were taken back to the same spot in France shortly after the war had ended. Surprisingly, when they got there were other men sharing the same accommodation who reported similar occurrences in the exact same area. They were all taken to the woods and had to describe where and how the events took place. My granddad had said that the entire area was guarded heavily and that part of the ground was heavily excavated. The strangest thing of all, the other, he said, was that there were hundreds of dogs in the area, just milling around for no apparent reason. They returned to the UK with a gag order ordering them never to speak about any of this. He went back to the same spot in France before he died in 1985 and said that the area had been covered with unmarked warehouses and was guarded by an unusually professional security company. He reckoned they were military. I've tried to find out more about this but can't find any records of it, but I do remember one of the guys who he was with the day he used to come and visit sometimes and referred to the place as the Splintered Woods. It's not even that creepy, but the first time it happened was the first time I've ever considered that anything supernatural might be real. Very occasionally at my desk at work I hear breathing in my left ear. There's a wall behind me, a window to my left, but you can't hear any outside noise. I don't feel a breeze or anything, I just hear it. It's peaceful and sad, like a sigh. My first thought was air conditioning, but it's such a clear sound that just cuts through everything as if it's coming from a whole different world to the general office noise. It's very definitely only in my left ear and I never hear it anywhere else. Every time it kicks in I very calmly just get up and leave my desk for 5 minutes, and when I come back it's gone. I've related this before but I'll repeat it again. I can think of a few things that happened in my first year of college. I used to live in an apartment kind of place on campus, with 3 other people. We all had our separate bedrooms, but shared a living space. It was on the 7th floor, to give a better idea. Once, I woke up at around 2 a.m. to find that my phone was automatically playing a song. I closed the app, but it happened 2 to 3 times again. I would have put this down to my phone being weird, but then one of my roommates told me the exact same thing happened to her as well. This wasn't all. A few days later, I woke up to a beeping sound coming from my phone, and when I checked, it was apparently a sound recording. The duration showed as 0.00 though, which meant that it shouldn't technically play at all. I deleted it immediately. Another time, my roommate and I were watching a movie and had stayed up till 3. It ended and she went to sleep. After a few minutes, she burst into my room and asked me what I was doing. I was confused because I was just lying in bed, reading. She said that she heard very weird noises from the window, which she assumed I was making, to scare her or something. I went to her room and it sounded like heavy breathing / sighing. I told her it is just the wind. We opened the window and saw that the trees etc. were completely still. I don't have the same phone, room, or roommates anymore, even though I still stay on campus. Not necessarily creepy, but definitely made me question reality. I used to work in a gas station. One regular customer was like night and day. One day he'd be soft-spoken and shy, the next he'd be obnoxious. His cigarette preference also changed from day to day. But he always came in the same work truck with the same guys at the same time of day. One day, he walked in and went straight to the bathroom. A minute later, he walked in again and came to the counter. Twins. It took me 8 months to realize they were twins. And not even identical twins, either. They just looked really similar. I'm the type of person who keeps my bedroom door closed and locked all the time, no matter what, even if I'm home alone. So like a year ago, it was 1 a.m. and I had decided to get a glass of water before going to bed. After coming back in my room I swore that I closed and locked my door. After about 30 minutes of me dozing in and out of sleep, I suddenly felt all the ambient noise completely dissipate and immediately got that something feels off feeling. I got up and saw that my door was wide open. It scared the shit out of me as I was home alone. I've just chalked it up to being a one-time mishap on my part. Almost got kidnapped, maybe. I hailed a lift because I was too drunk to drive. Car pulled up, I got in and was like, take me to 123 Home St. Phone rings. I answer and hear, I'm your Lyft driver, I just watched you get into a car and that is not your Lyft, you need to get out right now. Need. Hey bud, I'm getting a friend to pick me up, thanks anyway. Hopped out at the red light we were stopped at. The driver and I talked about how one of the reasons we didn't have Lyft in my city for a while was because girls were getting kidnapped and forced into sex trafficking. So now since these guys can't use ride-share apps, they're preying on drunk girls that they see on the street, hailing a ride and just pick them up. Thankfully I got into the front seat because the back might have had a child lock on. Asked the driver to make sure I got into my house before driving away since old creeper had my address. Went to pick up my car the next day, and not only did I not get sex trafficked, I didn't get a parking ticket either, so that was cool. Definitely a lot more cautious now. It's really weird thinking that might have been a life-destroying event. I've posted this before. I used to visit my grandparents' house with my father every Sunday. A very odd family lived a few houses down. They had a massive property in the middle of old Pasadena. The house had 3 stories, a basement, and huge backyard. I was introduced to the little girl that lived that at some birthday party. We would to sit on the side of the house and look for 4-leaf clovers. She told me she liked to play in the backyard barn, but nobody was allowed to go back there anymore. She promised there were a ton of animals there, and I loved animals, so of course I wanted to go. She said we had to be very quiet and fast, but she would show it to me. We had to follow this little trail maybe a quarter of a mile behind the house. There was a ton of foliage around the trail and it blocked out the building, and there was a barn back there. It was massive and really something you would see out of a movie. She said it had been in the family for a long time, but the barn looked pristine. When we approached it, she told me we had to be very quiet and that we couldn't go inside. We started playing around the barn, but not directly next to it. We started looking for clovers again for a while before I remembered she mentioned animals. When I asked if we could see them, she scrunched up her face and got up. She didn't say anything but did get up and start walking towards the barn. The grass was overgrown right up against the barn, which didn't really make any sense because it looked brand new. The rest of the area was cleared out, the grass was only overgrown up near the barn. She started digging through the grass like she was looking for something. She wouldn't tell me what. The longer I stood next to the barn, the more uncomfortable I got. I felt like we were somewhere we weren't supposed to be. I became a little distracted and started looking around for our parents or some adult to jump out and scold us. When I turned around again, there was a pile of bones sitting on the ground. I looked up at her and she was holding a very small skull in her hands. It looked like it would have belonged to a sheep, but way smaller. She leaned in and whispered, "This is why we can't play back here. My mommy said he doesn't like animals anymore." I'm not sure why I wasn't freaked out. Once I noticed the bones, I could see them scattered all through the grass. We heard her mom called for us and we ran back. It wasn't until a year or so later at another birthday party that I was in the backyard again. I asked her mom if we could go play by the barn and she looked at me like she'd seen an alien. She said they never had a barn. The trail to it just disappeared. There were big trees there and everything. Something weird happened with the adults after that and I wasn't allowed to go to their house anymore. I have no idea what happened. It was very creepy. I'm fairly certain I had an overactive imagination as a child and dreamed all of that up. I asked my father a few years back if he'd ever seen that neighbor's barn. He had no idea what I was talking about. Why would there be a barn in the middle of a big city? I was camping with my family on summer break when I was a kid. The first night we heard some rustling off in the distance, so my dad went to go check it out. He came back and said he found an old dirty sleeping bag with a bunch of trash around it. I took this as him implying that it could have been a camp that got ransacked by a curious bear. We'd hear movement in the tree line for the next couple nights, and it scared the shit out of me. The last night we were there, I had a nightmare that a bear had made it into my tent and was licking and biting my feet. I woke up from the dream and shined my watch light into the dirt-covered wrinkly face of an elderly man. He was sucking on my toes, and he immediately exited my tent and took off right after we made eye contact. I still don't know if it was my imagination or not all these years later. I never told anyone, and I have nightmares about it often.